Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here on Rob Grant's podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. And today's guest is Mark Cantor. It's January 25, 2022. How in the heck are you, Mark? Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from my office out in Agora Hills.
And I'm in Venice, California. We're going to talk about jazz and film today. Boy, it's an honor to work with you in the past. You've shown jazz films to people for many years. It's always been a truly enlightening experience.
Well, it's
Let's
always been
just,
my pleasure.
yeah, and I love your write up by some highbrow jazz critic said, he's not stuffy.
Oh, I haven't run across that one,
You're down to earth.
but it's nice not to be stuffy, Jerry.
Yeah, it is. It is a pleasure because you know how to introduce jazz films. You have a great stage presence. But let's just get down to it. What is the function of music?
Mm, wow. Um, Essentially, it's to entertain. I think it can educate and teach. I think it can act as an emotional support, a religious support, because I think it originated back as a religious or part of religious services or activities. Um, Today, I guess it has sadly become ambient noise for life, which is a sad thing to say, huh?
Wow, you really covered the waterfront there. Ambient noise for life. But let's just go back because we might be joined by our colleague Brad Kay, but if not, we'll review some of these thoughts right off the bat. You know, Marshall McLuhan was a friend of Duke Ellington's. They met, they were friends, they exchanged letters. Duke Ellington wrote how Marshall affected him. And Marshall says this amazing thing that you brought up, and I wanted to bring this up. McLuhan says it's misleading to suppose there's any difference between education and entertainment. This distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other pleases. However, it's always been true whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So it sounds like a lot of gibberish. I know he's basically trying to say what pleases us teaches us. So, in general, we go to school and people don't like school, but they're learning. That's education. But they go to the movies or they go to a concert and they go there and have fun. That's called entertainment. So, right off the bat, you said it could be to entertain or educate. Now, any thoughts on just that? What pleases teach is what pleases teaches us more effectively. Just that line.
Um, I don't know if I want to use the word pleases, Jerry. Engages, I think, might be a little more accurate. Remember, I taught school for 40 years.
There you go.
So that connection between engagement and through engagement, attention, and some sort of emotional buy in was something that was part of my daily life for, every minute that the kids were there. And I think it also applies to adult pursuits, such as music or film or drama or any of the visual arts. The only thing that McLuhan had wrong was that what pleases educates, but what pleases also can disseminate lies or misinformation.
Yeah.
Another
Well,
issue altogether, perhaps.
no, it's a very important issue because there's a book I'm studying. It's around here somewhere. I'm going to show it to you, but it's about how music does more than please. It can, when we go to, what is the function of music? Mickey Hart, the drummer of the Grateful Dead, wrote a great book how it was first to communicate like there's a warning, someone's coming to steal our food. So they beat the logs, and that created a percussive sound that became music. You know, so they were using it as a means to communicate like a warning. So, you get deep into the 60s um, civil rights movement, and that's exactly what the musicians were doing. This will give us a chance to communicate something. Now, do we want to hear about racial injustice when we're going to a concert? Well, if you're Miles Davis and you go outside at a break and white cops beat you up,
Yeah.
how much is his horn telling us this thing that might not be pleasing us? It's like more educating us. Who knows? I mean, that's again, it's a tricky question to say what is the function of music. I love that you bring in emotional, but I mean, if I had to say your celluloid improvisation archives is now how many years has that been going, let's say?
Whoa. Maybe more than half a century. Yeah.
So you mean 40, no, more than 40 years. How many
Oh,
years?
I'd say more than 50 years.
So more than 50 years is more than you you were a professional educator. You're
Well,
you're
yeah, yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
you're a professional educator for 40 years. You're a jazz film collector for 50 years, approximately.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you succeeded as an educator. I imagine you had a great career and you felt you did your job well.
Loved it.
Right. And you probably have students who loved you too.
I am in constant contact with them.
Do you feel, as you're a jazz film collector, you're more entertainment or more education? Now, I know the word more is funny there, but just your sort of inclination.
Um, when I share films, it is never without thinking that if there isn't entertainment, emotional engagement, then it's not worth showing a clip. On the other hand, there are no clips that can't teach us as well. Jerry, they're really both sides of the same coin. And as I tell people, you've been to my, well, hell, I've shared films many times at your theater. And what I've told people before is, as I'm introducing a clip, um, I might talk about that clip for a minute or two, but I could easily talk off the cuff for a half hour, maybe an hour, if we're going to delve into the backstory, the history, um, the importance or lack thereof of the clip or the music. So yeah, it's two sides of the same coin. You can't divide the two. You really can't.
You're not gonna like you're like the woman I asked a couple weeks ago, is it more this or more that? She goes, the word more doesn't function in your question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there might be a clip where the entertainment value is a little more present than the educational backstory,
Yeah.
and vice versa. But I think we make a mistake if we try to divide the two into separate sides of the divide.
Yeah.
They're way too commingled.
Mark, I'm glad you're holding your ground. I said I said, "This is Cantor banter." We're doing Cantor banter. But, just the and here's a technical question in that regard. Amazing phenomenon since you were literally forced to go digital. You didn't have a choice, right? You
Oh,
couldn't.
no, no, I could have continued, at least in terms of, presentations out of the house. I could have continued with the film, but for many, many reasons,
Yeah,
the digital makes much more sense.
yeah, and I would say here's one. When I saw your many screenings pre-digital, there was no credit up on the screen next to the player with their name.
Yeah,
We had to memorize it or take notes. I have piles of Mark Cantor screening notes in boxes around here somewhere, scribbling these names down with a pen and paper.
yeah.
Now, people can actually go to YouTube, type your name in, and watch a sort of mini Mark Cantor film presentation. It's really good. It has I forgot the guy's first name, then it has Bill Evans, then it has Sidney Bechet, and it has you talking. So you really get the taste of what a Mark Cantor jazz thing is. And there, right there, with the person's playing, their name is especially the Sidney Bechet clip, you've digitally typed in their
Yeah.
name as they're soloing. So I would say educationally wise, that's brilliant because we
I'm
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead,
Can I tell you where that came from?
please.
Well, I was always interested, ever since I was a little kid, about the personnel, on this record or that record, who's playing alto, who's playing second tenor. That's just something that interested me. But where it became important for the films was a television shoot one day, and we were between takes, and maybe it was coffee break time. And I said to the musicians, "Anyone want coffee?" Everyone raised their hand, and Sweets Edison realized that I wasn't going to be able to carry it all by myself. So he said, "Hey, I'll come and help you." So here I have Sweets Edison, and I say to him on our way to the cafeteria, "Can I ask you an old jazz film question?" And he said yes, but he had been to one of my shows, and he said, "I'll answer your question, but you got to make a promise to me." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And he said, "Well, back in the 30s and 40s, the sidemen, even the featured sidemen, and he was one of them, we had our butts kicked from coast to coast. It was a rough life. And even if you were playing with Count Basie, you were just the trumpet soloist, the sideman. It was Count Basie and his orchestra." And he said, "I want you to continue to seek out information about the sidemen. And when you find out, you got to let people know, because even that second alto player who never plays melody, he's always playing harmony, says you have a second alto player who's a little bit sharp, a little flat, a little ahead or behind the lead, the band sounds like shit." So
Yeah,
that's where all of the names on the screen come from ultimately.
yeah. But listen, I'm watching the state of the art jazz documentaries nowadays, whether it be Lee Morgan's or Train or Miles, and they don't even do this now. And, Summer of Soul was a great film, in my opinion. You've got Herbie Mann up there. The only person they highlighted in their band was Sonny Chirac. It was very rare that one of these side people, but we should have seen the credits under Stevie Wonder's whole band and under Max Roach's old band. But I'm not criticizing the film overall. I hope it wins the Oscar so we can see jazz get a good nod. How'd you rate that film, by the way?
I liked
5,
it a
8?
lot.
Yeah,
I would say that my criticism was the same as yours. You know, all of the documentaries that we see truncate performances,
yeah.
and that hurts my heart.
Ooh,
But I understand. You know, I've been involved in enough documentaries to know that that's just the nature of the beast.
yeah,
But I happen to like Summer of Soul very much.
yeah. And then you go to the Monk film that Clint Eastwood produced, gave him the money. I mean, that you get some performances that aren't truncated, like,
Yeah,
thank God, finally, a
yeah,
jazz film that shows you a little more than having someone talk in the middle of a song.
yeah. All of this goes back to two things, I think, Jerry. One is a mistrust of the music, and the second is a pattern that was established back with a film in the late 50s called Jazz on a Summer's Day. And in some ways, it's a fine documentary, at times, even a great documentary. But at other points in it, this distrust of the music comes to the forefront, and it set patterns that to this day we haven't escaped. We have uh, Felonious Monk on stage, and this is one of the earliest pieces of Monk to be seen on screen. And I, I'll admit I'm biased. I adore Monk's music from beginning to end. And so he starts to play. We get past the melody statement, and then he continues to play. But on screen, we see sailboats. We see these people at the concession stands. We see people either dozing or listening with their eyes closed in the audience. And as I say, this is a distrust that the music's going to hold our attention. So we have to offer these visual um, hors d'oeuvres throughout the performance.
It's definitely interesting, Mark, how you set that up, having this comprehensive knowledge of films, and that we're gonna get into that in a second because we already jumped into it, but what establishes the live music documentary that has to sell in a popcorn theater for 90 minutes? What
Yeah,
establishes that? When Pennebaker went to, the producers who might put, Monterey Pop on the big screen, they goes, "It doesn't meet industry standards."
yeah, yeah.
And it's like, "What?" I mean, in retrospect, industry standards changed, but indeed, the film's legs proved it did, and so we do get these rarities, like I wanna go into, Shirley Clark's Ornette Coleman doc, which is an experimental film maker making a doc on an experimental musician. So that's a good range, and you know that this you have that comprehensive awareness of all jazz films, thank God, because, I was showing films in the 70s in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I loved jazz all of a sudden because I got into jazz because I heard Herbie Hancock's Chameleon, and it was funk. And we people goes, "No, that's jazz." And we goes, "Well, if it's jazz, I like jazz." And then I went backwards. So, and I saw David Meeker's book Jazz on Film, which had Eraserhead had music by Fats Waller, his organ period, and
Yeah.
I would just happen to get from Herbie's funk into Fats Waller, and I was like, "Well, I gotta see this film because of the soundtrack." So it leads me to the question, what gravitated you to loving music and then particularly loving jazz in your background? You're growing up. How are you hearing music? And then was the tipping point to lean towards jazz? Was it always jazz or were just your history on forming your inclination towards jazz?
Well, there was always music around the house, and my folks had a record player, a console that played 78s, and they had no problem with me playing the 78s. I know that I broke the second disc to Sibelius's symphony in E minor, and it took me years to get to hear that. But along with the classical stuff was a lot of pop music and a fair amount of jazz. But what really, really hooked me was sometime around 1955, 56. My dad had succeeded in his
Wow.
yeah, little excitement. Let me
That was Mark, keep talking. I'm gonna grab that book. This was like a moment. Hold on. That was like I thought Brad K was breaking through the cosmic door.
no, it was something that I had piled incorrectly in it. In any case, so my
Wait,
dad
wait, Mark, did that educate or entertain us?
it it
Just
educated me to stack things differently.
so
So my dad enters the middle class, and one day he brought home a hi-fi system, and it was the replacement for the old 78 player. And when he bought it, he was given a set of albums that went with it. And it was the Benny Goodman 1938 Carnegie Hall concert. So what happened was we're now entering the middle class. We have a hi-fi system, but there isn't the spendable cash to buy a lot of LPs. That happens very gradually. And so I listened and re-listened and re-listened to that 3 album set, to the point that today when I listen, I can anticipate an errant laugh from someone in the audience. I know it that well. So, the albums come very slowly and they're very eclectic, because right after Benny Goodman's 38 Carnegie Hall concert comes Sinatra's Songs for Swinging Lovers, which is his finest album, in my opinion. And then comes some Artie Shaw 78 reissues, and then comes the Oklahoma soundtrack. So I think my experience here is probably the same as yours.
yeah.
It's what we listened to when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
What we were
I'm
exposed
glad
to.
you said Oklahoma, just to interject really quick. My parents might have played some of that, not aware of it at all in my memory, but they were playing South Pacific, Oklahoma. We didn't realize, me as a boober didn't realize I was learning jazz and blues through Cole Porter, through Gershwin, through Irving Berlin, because those guys were using those elements of
Yeah.
jazz and blues, and we were really learning that.
Yes,
So, so
exactly.
you, yeah. So I'm glad you brought up that Oklahoma soundtrack. In fact, Frank Zappa quotes Surrey with the Fringe on Top in the middle of a guitar solo at a rock concert in 73. And and that's because these melodies were immense and they were beautiful. And then it became that tradition in jazz where you quote American musicals. But I'm just wondering, your peer group, Mark, was listening more to what? Rhythm and
Oh,
blues? Pat
I
Boone? Who?
I was the sole jazz lover in my peer group.
And they were listening to what?
Um, Surf rock, the
Surf
Beatles,
rock. Yeah.
what they called girl groups,
Yeah.
um, soul music, and I was with them. I was with them along on that ride, where I checked out just because it didn't resonate with me, was hard rock, where, music has many elements. And when the rhythms sort of took precedence over melody and harmony,
Yeah.
for me, um, it was much more entertaining and educational to to go back to Red Garland or Bill Evans
Yeah.
or Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong.
Yeah. No,
And
that's amazing. But Mark, hold on that for a
yeah,
second. What is it in your upbringing, your DNA, that what makes up Mark Cantor that you gravitated towards that and your peer group gravitated towards the other? What do you think? I mean, deep down inside, what
yeah.
like your soul, your what makes up who Mark is? What do you think it was? How
I,
can you
I
explain it?
I think it was. This is Jerry. This is going to sound a little simplistic, but I think it was the Benny Goodman Carnegie Hall concert, because for maybe as much as a year, that was the only jazz that I knew.
Yeah.
And so when I started to explore, there was nothing more than Benny Goodman, right? Oh, wait a minute. There's Artie Shaw. Wait a minute. There's Duke Ellington. Who's this Jimmy Lunsford cat? And from there, I moved back and learned about the 20s. And then I moved forward to learn about bop, hard bop, and what we call free or avant garde jazz. But it all stems, I think, from the appreciation that I gained from that very first set of albums.
Yeah, it's perfect because it leads into the question. My friend calls it the 3 T's in music: technique, taste, and theory. And Dave Liebman, this great saxophonist who played with Miles Davis, he says head, hand, and heart. So head is theory. It's a C chord, or this, like my friend says, the next song is in the G of key. What this structure is. Hand is technique. You can learn how to play. Brad can play like Fats Waller. That's technique. But taste, which Dave Lehman says is heart, how does one acquire taste in music, and is how's that different from aesthetics? You just weigh in on how does one acquire taste, and is that the same as aesthetic?
Oh, wow, wow, wow. I would say that taste is based maybe more, I'm improvising here, Jerry, because you didn't email me any of the questions.
That's right. We're
Yeah,
celluloid
yeah, improvisation.
improvisation. And this is live TV, by the way, Mark. That's the amazing thing. We're on live TV.
Yeah. And I'm
Beautiful.
behaving. I'm behaving. I'm not swearing. I'm not.
No, you can say no, there's no restrictions on our live TV. So go ahead.
I would say taste is a matter of experience, immediate experience. Um, what are we comparing it to? Taste and
Well, aesthetic is just another word. Is that different? I mean, your aesthetic is I know what pianists you gravitate towards. You will show Horace Silver, you will show Bill Evans, you will show other pianists
okay.
who
All right.
play.
So Jerry,
Yeah.
aesthetically, someone like, oh, and I'm stepping on some toes here, but you know, so be it. Dr. Billy Taylor had it all. He had incredible technique, imagination, the sense of swing, the soul. Aesthetically, he had it together musically. But in terms of taste, I very, very rarely
Yeah.
go to listen to Dr. Billy Taylor because in his approach, it all sounds the same.
Yeah.
I don't hear him taking chances, for instance.
Yeah.
Um, so, I can appreciate him, and I certainly don't shun him, but my aesthetic appreciation for him, my respect for him, isn't equaled by my personal musical taste.
Yeah. That's
Um,
that was well put, Mark, because it's not like you said, that's not stepping on toes. Everyone has a point of view. The funny thing that Marshall McLuhan said is we invented point of view when we had the vanishing point in paintings. Because when did people start going, you know, go back to the guys banging on the logs? When did they start going, dude, you're playing the logs too loud, or you're playing the same riff too much,
yeah,
you know? And so, I met that great drummer who played with Charlie Hayden. He played with Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday. You probably remember his name. I always forget his name. He's great. He played jazz drumming beautifully for 50, 60 years. And
um,
he played in Charlie Hayden's quartet with Alan Broadbent on piano. And I said,
mhm,
I heard that when the bass got amplified in jazz, the drummers lost their subtlety because they had to hit harder to be heard.
yeah,
And he said, because he was a master of the brushes. And he says, well, one of my friends said, you can stick me up and brush me off. Because this is true. You shook your head. Yeah, they had to hit harder because the subtlety lost because the bass got amplified, you know.
yeah.
So this is a fun thing to just veer off into for a second is the technology since this salon is on film and jazz, the amazing thing that this theme is that jazz is approximately 127 years old, according to Brad. I mean, it's all debatable. Film is approximately 130 years old. In recording music is 140 years old. They're pretty much all pretty close. Why did humans have to record music? What caused us to it? And I'll just set it up with I've asked Brad this. He has every recording device ever in his house, a lathe.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
He has a lathe to what do you call those cylinders to record?
Cylinders. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I said, did recording music ruin music? And he knows what I meant by ruin because music is a live event. And he goes, yep. Now, I knew he was being honest with me. It's not that he's going to throw all his amazing collections of recordings out or abandon them. I mean, he uses a little digital Zoom to record things now. So I'm just curious, it's a bigger picture thing. Why do humans have to record anything? Why did they invent recording? Because the essence of jazz and the essence of music is that it's sacred because it's a live thing. So,
Well, I don't think I can say anything that Brad didn't say, but from a historical perspective, remember that um, when the recording cylinder was first developed, it was meant to be an office instrument. It was meant to be just a utilitarian tool to be used in commerce. And, someone at some point in time had this very trippy and avant garde idea of we can preserve music as well. Um, this all circles also around the fact that before there was recorded music, there was sheet music because the piano was in every parlor and the sheet music was the key to bringing music into your home. But not everyone had the economic wherewithal to have a piano. Not everyone lived in a locale where there were symphony orchestras, where there were nightclubs. And so, in that way, recording didn't destroy music or ruin music. It created a mass love of music. And uh, someone's living on a farm in Iowa, and they're not going to get to New York City to hear the New York Phil. They're not going to hear Franck's great symphony live on stage. Why should they be prevented from loving and learning from that music?
Really good point. And you knew what I meant when I put the
Yeah.
air
Oh, yeah.
quotes.
Of course. Of course.
It means it changed it, but it is also every human invention has services and disservices.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, Brad, just bring the chair over here and sit here. And so, this I bring that chair over here. And in that regard, every human invention has services and disservices. I'm curious, like your take on this idea that you were able to really cultivate that love of jazz because of that repeated listening of Benny Goodman. Was that Charlie Christian on guitar, by the way?
Not at that point in time.
Not
That's
at that
a little
point.
bit. So let me
Yeah,
ask you a question, Jerry.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
assume that you and I, is Brad there?
Yeah, Brad's here, but I was
And
going
Brad.
to introduce him after you asked the
All right.
question. Officially. Hold on.
Let's assume that the very first time I was introduced to jazz, you were introduced to jazz, was when we were 21 years old, because that's when we could get into most places where jazz was played, right? And let's assume there had been no recordings. And here you and I have this opportunity to go to a nightclub to hear this strange stuff called jazz. Maybe we heard it on the radio, maybe we didn't, but we didn't have recordings. How would that have changed our lives?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And at this point, because Brad couldn't get on the Zoom, we're going to say, Brad appears live. Just kind of lean in, Brad, because we only got, you got to lean in.
Hey, Brad.
Lean
Hey
in.
there,
You got to
okay.
stay in that
Oh,
lean.
all right.
So
Okay.
Brad's here now. So we're going to ask him some of these questions that we
Yep.
reviewed with you really quick. So we're going to backtrack a little, but this is interesting because Brad, the first question was, what is the function of music?
To break up the silence.
Well, that's beautiful because Thelonious Monk said that silence is the loudest sound in the universe. And I asked Stuart Isaacoff, he's the jazz critic and music writer for the Wall Street Journal. What's the function of music? And he said, boredom. So it's interesting what Mark delved into earlier, and everybody can go back and see the beginning of this tape. But what I'm trying to say now, Mark, is that the live event of music is sacred. So why did we have to? Because you talked about the services of recording, but tell me a disservice of inventing recording devices. Didn't it reduce the sacredness of the live music event?
Oh, absolutely. And so you're left in the position of saying, which of these two options serves humanity the most? The sacredness of live music or music for the masses, for everyone?
Yeah.
Because they're almost mutually exclusive.
Yeah. That's really well put. So, Brad, you were asked by me many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
did recording music ruin music? And you said yes. And I knew that you knew what I meant by ruin, but you want to weigh in on this issue of the sacredness of the live event and then what did recording music
Well,
really do?
all right. Well, um, when you don't know what's going to happen, when the next sound that comes out of the guy's horn is a complete mystery, um, and you're hanging on what he's going to do, or what he might do, or what he isn't going to do, but you don't know in advance until he does it. That is really quite exciting. Okay. And people have these experiences, used to have these experiences, I must say, before all the time in, wherever music was being played, and so, um, I mean, I had that experience one night watching television. Well, actually, I was sleeping, um, and I had gotten in very late from a gig, and I flopped down on my bed, and I was just lying there, too tired to sleep, and so I punched the remote control to see what was on. All right, on the screen came this. There was this black and white movie. I don't know, but the first thing I heard actually was blaring because the volume was set too high. Was the sound of Bix Beiderbecke with Paul Whiteman's orchestra playing for all his life Mississippi Mud. All right. Well, this sound just nailed me to the wall. I was, oh my God, and I mean, and there's, Bix's cornet, and it was fucking unbelievable. And I was telling myself, I've never heard this before. This is unbelievable. This is fantastic. Who is this guy? So forth, and it caught me completely unawares. And of course, when it was all over, my reasoning mind crept back into the picture, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's this record. That would take whatever." But but I had that experience that people used to have of hearing somebody, in this case Bix, live. You never knew what was going to happen, and now I could go to my record room, pull out that very record, and dust it off, put it on the turntable, and check all the controls to make sure it's kosher, and then drop the needle on the edge of the record, kick back, and wait for the golden tones to transport me. But that would be an entirely different experience than what I just described. So I, you could mention Marshall McLuhan here, but that's the point. Is that the medium definitely is the message in this case. So is that
Wow, Brad, that
yeah?
was really good. But Mark, talk about did you know what Brad was seeing? Do we know that clip that he saw on
Oh,
that
I'll
TV?
tell you, it was Paper Moon. They were showing Paper Moon with Ryan and Tatum
Oh,
O'Neill.
you mean Peter Bogdanovich's. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
and the which was you remember, actually, if you
Yeah.
remember that film, that it was that our old friend Joe Monte was the musical consultant, so he chose all the records that they used in that movie, and that was one of them. Um, and so, but you see, it was the combination of me kind of being in
Yeah.
a semi-somnolent state, and turning on the television and having this completely just blast out and nail me to the wall. It absolutely sidestepped and thwarted all of my music expectation circuitry that I get when I pull a record, and was an utterly fresh experience. And after it was over, by the way, I turned off the television because I figured that nothing else that they could possibly broadcast that night could top that.
Okay, let's catch Brad up. Mark, this is fun. Hang in there. Um, so I asked Mark about how someone forms taste in music. So the three T's of music could be technique, theory, and taste. You have a lot of technique, you've learned how to play, you have theory, you know what you're doing. How does one form taste? How
Well,
does one acquire taste?
you listen a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're, I mean, I was, I don't know how my taste was formed because it seemed like I, I was born knowing about old jazz. I mean, when I, and it, when that when I finally encountered it in different places, I went, oh yeah, that's it. That's what I've been hearing. It never came as a big surprise. You see, I didn't have an, oh my God, what is that? Oh hell, what is it? What's the name of that? Who did that? Blah, blah, blah. I just heard it and I went, oh yeah, okay, you know. So I don't know if that's just a peculiarity of me or if other people have had that kind of an experience, but it seems like I've always been tuned in to that style of music, and so
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting, Mark, because you said you weren't tuned in to depth of what your peer group was, surf rock, and Brad found his way into jazz, and I found my way into jazz. So, what I'm curious about, just to follow this theme up of live, when we go to Mark's screenings of jazz films, he will talk, he will show 3 clips, and after each clip, the audience will clap. Now, if I'm in a movie and I see the Grateful Dead documentary for 4 hours, at the end of the film, people don't clap. And I'm like, I want to clap. If they were playing live, people would clap. What is it, Mark? And then we'll go to Brad's feelings. There's something different happening. If you play a record at your house, Brad plays a record for a friend. When the record ends, they don't clap. But there's something about a movie clip or something about a Mark Cantor film screening, they'll clap. Why?
Well, in part because we're engaging not only hearing but sight as well, and we're experiencing the movie, the visual and the auditory input along with others, and it is that being there with other people, I think, that heightens the emotional response, makes it more concert-like in a way. You're sitting there. If I watch a clip here in my office, I don't clap. But if I'm with a group of people, even if I've seen that clip 50 times, I'm tempted to applaud because I've seen and heard a performance in a setting that resembles live performance.
Hmm.
So that was good, Mark, because now we go to Brad. Brad, it's not often, I imagine, that you play a record at your house and people clap, but you've gone to Mark's screenings, and after the
Oh, well,
song,
I beg your pardon. You sit corrected, sir. Uh, no, I have played records many times at my house when there were people over, you know. Um, and the thing is that people were, people are organized in a group, and the purpose is to hear music. That's very different from just randomly playing stuff. Sweeping the house and stuff while you with the music. But but no, I've played records, and I always play them when there are people over. I play them at a volume and a fidelity that will preclude talking. See, I don't want anybody to mistake that this is background music for their lives, but that this is the main event. This is the real entertainment, So even if there is no visual component, you see, I want the music to have that impact, and I want you to actually be there and hearing Leroy Tibbs' Connie's Inn Orchestra or Albert Wynn's Gut Bucket 5 or whoever it is, and that performance that I'm giving you over the phonograph will be will translate to reality, to where the person is on tenterhooks and waiting for the next event to occur, the next solo, the next ensemble, and and then when it's over, he just goes, yeah, and I've had that happen a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of presentation and expectation on the part of the listeners.
That's a really good point, Brad, because I think that's with Mark making him comfortable in the theater setting. Like I always said, Mark, if you just showed 90 minutes of jazz clips and didn't say anything every third song, people would be way more bored. But your presentation, the word Brad used, Mark, you use this 3 words and weigh in on it, please. The surprise of sound. Tell us, the critic who brought that up, I think is, yeah. And what does that mean? Does that apply to some of what our discussion now?
What you're talking about is a phrase introduced by Whitney Baylier, and it goes back to exactly what Brad was saying just a few minutes ago. And that is, you go in to hear some jazz, or you put on a record or a film, and you have certain expectations. And
especially if you've heard it before.
yes, yes. And I've got something to say about that. But I first want to just say that Brad put it perhaps a little more eloquently, but it can all be boiled down to the fact that you're hearing something that surprises you. And in the surprise comes delight. And, the breaking of these expectations is what makes the music special. So can I riff on for just a second?
Please.
Riff
Okay.
on, my little gypsy sweetheart. Yes.
So
Nothing like celluloid improvisations live on TV.
all right. So people say, why did jazz die? If indeed it has, it hasn't died. Why isn't it maintaining the popular position it used to have? On life, and I think I have one of the reasons.
Okay.
Okay, the three of us go out to a jazz club, and there's someone of incredible talent and ability. Let's say Wayne Shorter, right?
Right.
Now, if Wayne Shorter opens up his program, his set, with Star Eyes, right? We are listening, and as we listen to what he says about the song, we have certain expectations because we know the melody, we know the harmony, and we know the rhythmic underpinning. And when he plays something we don't expect, there is the sound of surprise, the delight in the music. But if we go to the same club and we hear 1 hour straight of compositions by Mr. Shorter or by anyone who's playing that we are totally unfamiliar with, then we are struggling understanding the music, the melody, harmony, and rhythm without the opportunity for the sound of surprise, because there's nothing to be astonished about, surprised about, beyond technique and perhaps new melody, but we don't really know where it's supposed to go. So when it goes in a different direction, there can't be the sound of surprise. Did that make sense?
Yeah. But Mark, is
Well,
that hold on one second, Brian, because I want you to weigh in, but is that the essence of jazz is collective improvisation? Would you say that's sort of what you're leaning towards, or one of the essence of jazz?
I'm saying that there has to be a shared experience between the performer and the audience. It's not just a one-way street.
Yeah.
If Brad plays a concert and he's sharing both new things for me or new things to me, but things that I'm familiar with, a little bit of Jelly Roll, a little bit of Fats, a little bit of James P. It's going to expand my appreciation and understanding and acceptance of his performance.
Yeah. That was good. So, Brad, you want to talk about this, what he just brought up?
Yeah. The best art, not only music, the most effective art, let's just say, the stuff that hits me in the kishkis, is and somehow an ideal balance between total chaos. This is my right hand. Okay, chaos on the one hand, and total order. Where's the other hand? On the other hand. So that in other words, if it's total order, if it's complete cookie cutter march music or something like that, that's going to be boring. If it's total chaos, if it's just absolute extreme, John Cage or whatever, Jackson Pollock in music, it's going to be it's going to tax my attention. It's going to the heavy novelty of it all will also numb me out. So what I'm looking for is a combination of something that's reassuring and familiar, along with stuff that is absolutely strange. And so if you look at the best music ever made, it is some combination of those two things. You could say that, for example, like Miles Davis, Sketches of Spain. Oh, that was all new. Yeah, but it's a record, and if you've heard it enough times, you become familiar with it. Okay, and so it loses the strangeness, and you're just left with the sound of surprise. But so sure, I'll play a song by Irving Berlin. Everybody knows that song, but then go off, then turn it into something, then make, and refer only to the melody now and then, or just riff off the harmony, or make make a completely other musical statement that you go, oh yeah, that's still Blue Skies, or whatever. So yeah, so that's my
Good.
take on the subject.
Brad, I'm going to quote from this book just
Hey.
for a second. Just for a second. Have you read this book, Mark? Are you familiar
I,
with it?
I know Ted, but I have not
How do
read
you
this
pronounce
book.
How do you pronounce his last name?
Joya?
Joya. Good. Ted Joya's book is bringing up this little issue I would love to talk about now, and that is, where did collective improvisation come from? What's the roots of humans wanting to veer off from the written notes or the traditional melody that was established, the folktale? And he says it well here, because Kid Ory said, I know that Buddy Bolton used to go to that church, but not for religion. He went there to get ideas on music. He'd hear these songs and would change them a little. So we'll start with you, Mark, and then go to Brad. What is the roots? Because I have my theory of why veer off and put the surprise of sound. Why did humans lean towards collective improvisation? And I know Brad and I have discussed this, that music was doing this previous to jazz, but it sure seemed to be part of the essence of
Well,
jazz.
let me just add one
Okay.
thing, Jerry, before, excuse me, Mark,
No.
that listen, there was musical notation, writing notes down on pages, and it being the text of music is a tradition that goes back only a few centuries. In fact, it's like only with Beethoven do you have a composer who insists that his music be followed, per the note. Before that, if you go backwards in time, it becomes increasingly amorphous. They said of Telemann's quartets that you could drive a coach and four between the lead violin and the figured bass. And then if you go back even further, the notation becomes even more sketchy. It's just these like sort of like squares and stuff on a staff, these medieval music. God, I have no idea what they were doing. And then before that, you've got nothing. And that's like only the 11th century. So what did they do for music in the millennia prior to that? What did they play in ancient Greece? What did they play in ancient Rome? What did they do on Atlantis or whatever? It was never notated. It was always something that was in the air. It was a thing that somebody heard. Now maybe it was something by rote. Maybe they played it the same way every time or tried to, but it was certainly it was a fluid thing. Music was a thing that you couldn't nail down, and so that's it.
Yeah, that was good. But your thoughts, Mark, because I'll just sneak in. Psychologists have ventured to theorize that Buddy Bolton was in a mental hospital for the last approximate 30 years of his life, in that the essence of jazz is improvisation. And that's why it came about, because he was a little off kilter mental wise. Now, I don't like to make a value judgment saying off kilter is bad, because in the old days, the shamans might have been what was considered the crazy people in the village. But your just thoughts on your gut intuition. Why did humans have to do this collective improvisation? One of these essence of jazz.
Wow. I don't know if it's something that they had to do or if it's something that's just built into the species, wired in. The
Yeah.
the need to take what we know, what we have, and expand upon it. Um, I don't go with the idea that Bolden's music can be tied to his psychological stability. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know if that's true with any jazz musician.
Yeah.
I think they're largely separate issues. But I would guess that the ability or the need to improvise or to build on what is already there is probably something that's innate in the species. I'm just guessing.
No,
We're
that was a good impulse too, because I
Yeah.
wanted to sort of support Brad's idea with the Maria Callas quote. In the doc on her is really good. And she said, in order to be a performer, you have to have half your brain in control and the other half out of control. You have to feel that big sensibility, and you can't just be what, someone we could talk about their mental um, capabilities too, is Felonious Monk. He said, music is math. Well, you listen to Monk, that's a lot more than math. And what an improviser. And we're lucky because Ollie often says when he's jamming with Brad, he feels like he's jamming with Thelonious Monk. And I always go, well, I'll second that emotion. But here we're back. Oh, and also back to the is jazz.
Dead ham,
Yeah. Frank Zappa said a great line. Jazz is not dead; it just smells funny.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
I know
that's
that
when
one.
that's when he brought Archie Shepp.
It's on life
Yeah,
support.
yeah, it's on life support, but it's like that's when Frank brought Archie Shepp out onto the stage, a rock concert, and let him blow saxophonists to a bunch of rock kids. Frank also jammed with Rahsaan Roland Kirk and Philly Joe Jones, so it's endless. But let's go back to Ted's book for 1 second. And here's another thing: the oldest original jazz song known to us is a nasty piece of work called Funky Butt, or, one of them. It's the trademark Buddy Bolden song, but it could change each time it was played. Sometimes the words were lighthearted, at other times obscene. Depending on the circumstances, it might serve as comedy or insult or even political commentary. The authorities did not look kindly on such improvisations. Here's Sidney Bechet. The police put you in jail if they heard you singing that song. Bolden started his theme song, people started singing, and policemen began whipping heads. That's pretty heavy. So I'm just
Well,
curious. Go
tho-
ahead, Brad.
those people took their music way too seriously.
Very
That just
good,
shows you
Brad.
Yeah.
shows you that people did take it serious. I mean, they really did. I mean, music was a tangible part of everybody's life,
Yeah.
before there was any other kind of media, when you just had, when you were, Og and Thog, and you were bumping two rocks together, it's like, that was it. That was entertainment, um yeah, so it's very deep now.
But Brad, you missed that part, and let's go into that because Ted's book also says in nearly every Indian myth, the creator sings things into life. So singing the world into existence, Pythagoras was holding up a stone and he said, "This is frozen music." And Zappa said that music is just sculpting air molecules. So why did humans invent music, Brad?
Well, I like to think of it as like all right, here's an oyster bed with a billion oysters on it, okay? Only one or two of those oysters is going to produce a pearl. Why does it produce a pearl? Because some foreign item, like a grain of sand, found its way inside the oyster, and the oyster gets so annoyed. He is so disturbed by this grain of sand that he wraps all his mother of pearl around it, and when they and he goes to all this trouble, and somebody finally opens him up and discovers a pearl inside the oyster. Well, I think it's a similar story with creative music. It's because only people who led uncomfortable lives create new music. I mean, look, if you're John Jacob Astor, you're not going to invent jazz. Okay, if you're Henry Morgenthau, the Treasury honcho, you're not going to invent jazz. But if you're Buddy Bolden, who is, first of all, a black man who's already an outsider, and also, and among black people, he's a musician, which is already an outsider, and then furthermore, he has a propensity for insanity, which makes him an outlier even among his fellow musicians. It does not surprise me at all that such a man would be constantly, tossing out variations, would be immensely creative, because because that's how he copes. That's how he meets his environment. He's the oyster that creates the pearl.
How poetic,
Very
Brad.
good,
That
Bob.
was
Real
beautiful.
quick, real quick.
Go ahead. Yeah, and Mark and I reviewed this little chart that you sort of said to me in prepping for this, Brad, that jazz is basically 127 years old, film's about 130 years old, and recording music's about 144 years old. So, our topic today was basically jazz and film. So it's interesting that I asked Brad, and I'm going to have you go into it, but I'm going to ask Mark first. What's the origin of the word jazz, Mark? You sort of told us how you gravitated towards jazz, but what's your sort of ideas on who started jazz? It's often called an American invention, and your love of jazz is so important to so many people because you've been able to educate it and spread it. But what's your just brief theory on the origin of jazz?
The word.
Well, the word.
I have, the word, I won't even attempt to solve that problem. I mean, there are any number of theories of where the word might have come from, and ultimately we're never going to know. So, I
What's one that you gravitate towards that you more like? More one or two that you appreciate? Because one of my favorites. What you go ahead if you.
no, to be honest with you, I've read, 3, 4, 5 proposed definitions, and they've the argument has never really uh, has never really engaged me. The music is the music, and even there, we have such a wide latitude as to what is jazz, what isn't, and it's ultimately sort of a hamster spinning in the cage. For instance, I think of the album. Uh, well, I mentioned it before. Songs for Swinging Lovers, the Frank Sinatra album. Do I say this is jazz singing? I say, yeah, it is for my money. Brad, who is intensely immersed in the music, might not agree, and there is no right or wrong here.
Oh, I give it up for Frank. Go on.
Yeah.
Good man. Good
Yeah.
man.
But
A bit of a thug, but
What's that? What's that, Brad?
a bit of a thug, but all right. You go
Oh
on.
yeah, I speak no. Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Right.
they asked uh, his daughter, Nancy Sinatra, when did the mob enter the music business? And she said, honey, we invented the music business. but it's interesting because Brad and I had the fortune to sit with Biff Rose, who's an interesting, weird icon in the music world. And he says, and this was in New Orleans, he said, the word jazz came from just your ass. It's just coming out of your ass. And I know Brad's not so fond of that. But Brad, you saw the email, the etymology susses
Yeah, you
out.
had a whole
Yeah.
glossary.
Well, that's
Jeez,
that's etymology online. They say jazz came in 1912, which is funny because if jazz really is established in 1895, the word wasn't like being used. But just a brief history of what you feel, Brad, on that subject.
Well, jazz was created by segregation. I mean, it's like when there used to be three races in New Orleans. There were Negroes, there were white people, and there were Creoles. And these Creoles always existed in a separate realm from the Negroes. They did not identify or associate or traffic with them in any way whatsoever. If you were a Creole, you were above all that. You see, you didn't go with these former slaves, and so forth, as these crude customers. Okay, but when Plessy versus Ferguson passed the Supreme Court, and it declared, like separate and equal and all of that. This was all the excuse that they needed to completely lump people of color, whether it was one, like one drop of blood to full African, all of them together into the same lump sum. And this was a big come down for a lot of Creoles, because all of a sudden here they are playing, who were Creoles who were educated, who had technique and played, scales, arpeggios, went to France, some of them, to get educated. And here they are playing with these crude customers who, with their Africanisms, and you didn't know if they were going to slit your throat. So it was so they were working together in the same band, higgledy piggledy, all of a sudden. And And that is when we start to hear about a strange new music around 1895. And of course, they didn't have any kind of word for it. See, words always come later. You know all about words. It's never about the words. It's about the actual vibration. It's about the sound that's being made, and so suddenly you had these bands full of Creoles who could read and were technical, and these Negroes who were just simply like they were doing stuff like right out of the earth, and the combination of the two was it was like two tubes of epoxy coming together. You had order and you had chaos. Bam. And I think that to me is the most plausible explanation of how jazz began.
Brad, that was really good because my dear friend Duncan suggested he read, and I'd love to get you guys' opinions on this, that the army left New Orleans and abandoned a bunch of musical instruments.
Well, that's part of it.
Is
Yes.
it? Can you talk about that?
Oh, sure. I mean, after the Civil War, yeah. I mean, yeah. They when they disbanded the armies, all the every regiment had a band. They had a brass band, and so all of a sudden, after the Civil War, the pawn shops were just packed with instruments. You could have your choice of cornets, trombones, clarinets. They were just they it was for small money you could get a cornet for $1, and I mean, and then you'd be off to the races. So this was a little side benefit of war in the Industrial Revolution. But you had this so you had all these instruments. I think it's interesting that saxophones didn't catch on until many years later, because saxophones were not used in military bands, and so they were a lot more expensive and so forth. So it took a while for saxes to catch on in jazz bands. That's why you have the clarinet, the cornet, and the trombone, but very seldom ever a saxophone until much way later. So there's always a quotidian explanation for why these things happened. You know, I think it's interesting that yes, that motion pictures, sound recording, and the music we call jazz all popped up around the same time. I think that it's like it was like the world was ready for these things to happen. It was it
Really beautiful, Brad. You really, our theme, jazz on film, has really been summarized there well, and it's also in Ted's book. He quotes the music ecologist Bernie Krause. He says each creature appears to have its own sonic niche, channel, or space in the frequency spectrum, occupied by no others at that particular moment. Bernie sees this oral territoriality as the foundations for the earliest human musical compositions. So it's interesting, us, Mark's being in LA, he's going to the lighthouse. So you could talk about that, developing the live musical experience. Brad's playing, Cab Calloway on the Venice boardwalk with Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. I'm going to see, Weather Report and McCoy Tyner at Baker's Keyboard Lounge in Detroit. All this is about space and place. This is the channel. We're on a live TV channel now. Or as Sunra says it best, space is the place. But Brad, talk about that a little, but especially what you taught me earlier this week. You said Jelly Roll, it was a way of playing. So it's like American Indians, indigenous, have no nouns. Everything's a verb. So
well,
you
yeah. Well,
you
listen.
describe jazz as a way of playing,
Well,
as
yeah.
a verb.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
talk about that. Is that well? I mean, there was okay. What was his name? Did you ever go, Mark, to the Los Angeles Press Club in the '70s, where they had the New Orleans Hot Jazz Society meetings, where you could see people like like Montucci Garland
Yep.
and and Johnny St. Cyr. He was a little before my time, but I could have seen Johnny St. Cyr, and Kid Ory would drop in there. And this is the New Orleans Hot Jazz Societies,
Yeah.
And okay, now the man's name is has skipped my memory for a moment. Maybe I'll come up with it. But anyway, he was 80 years old, trumpet player. And he was there for everything. He played with Buddy Bolden. He played with Lewis. He was King Oliver. He knew them all and so forth. And so he had great respect. This man, and we were having a heated discussion about music. And I don't remember what led up to this. But he said to me, and he was quite emphatic, and he says, "Well, you see, to play good music, you got to jazz it." And in that moment, I understood what the word jazz meant, because people have been using it wrong all these years. They've been using it as an adjective, i.e., they would say, "Oh, he's a jazz musician," or "She's a jazz baby," or that's jazz dancing. Okay, that's wrong. Okay, or worse yet, they use it as a noun. They say, "This is jazz." That is so corrupt. But I like the idea of jazz as a thing that's in motion, a thing you cannot tie down. That it's a verb. It's a verb. To make good music, you've got to jazz it. So, in connection with that, Jelly Roll Morton, on his Library of Congress interviews, which by the way, hello world, hey people, run, don't walk to your nearest a CD player or whatever and listen to Jelly Roll Carry On at the Library of Congress in 1938. I mean, it's like being at the piano bar in heaven. This guy just carries on. He talks all about his life. He plays the tunes. He talks about the theory and everything. He's just wonderful. I'm so grateful for these recordings. Anyway, at one point along the way, Jelly Roll says, he says jazz music says, you see, people got the wrong idea about jazz. Says they don't want it. Hitler don't want it. Why? Because of the noise, because of the blatant, they think it's all some blatant thing. Jazz is not a type of music, he said. It's not a style of playing. It is a way of playing music, of any kind of music, that makes it good. And he went on to illustrate this. He shows you how he would jazz up different themes, how he turned mazurkas and quadrilles into Tiger Rag, for example. That's a very, very famous segment. And but he shows you how you jazz things, and of course that impulse goes way the fuck beyond jazz. I hear it in Mozart. Christ, I mean, I hear it in Bach. These guys, these keyboard improvisers were the greatest who ever lived. My God, they put jazz people to shame. When you look at the improvisations of Beethoven and Mozart and Bach, they were the granddaddy, at least in modern times, of improvisation. So jazz is a way of doing things. You jazz things up, you jazz it. And that's as close as I can get to any kind of definition.
That was beautiful. And I don't know, Mark, we've really gone a long while here, so you probably got to move on. But just in closing, what questions remain unresolved for you in collecting jazz on film and your explorations on jazz as entertainment and education?
Well, I certainly hope that there will be people after our current generation is playing with Bix up in the sky who carry on the tradition of preserving both jazz on film, but recorded sound as well. If we're on life support, we got to keep that oxygen coming. And part of that oxygen is just access and the opportunity for people to remain immersed in the music. If it isn't preserved, if it isn't available, then it does die.
Well,
don't you die.
Yeah, thank God earlier, Brad, he said basically Mark taught for 40 years, educator, and collected jazz films for 50 years. So we really appreciate what you do, Mark, and we got to do this again. And Brad, what questions remain unresolved for you in the realm of jazz and film?
Well, you see, when it comes to records, and I include film with records as a kind of a record, is that record represents only a minuscule fraction of all the music that's played. That's been played. Most of it has just gone into the air, and we'll never hear it. And I mean, people like Bix and Charlie Parker should have had somebody with a tape recorder following them around for posterity. But instead, we just have to deal. We just have to be satisfied that Bix Beiderbecke made 278 sides, and that's his legacy. And you have to. And there, so what we see the reality through these tiny slits of time. But like we were reading last night about Bessie Smith, and it was so we get the impression that she was a great singer. But you see, what you don't hear on her records are her entertainment chops, what kind of an actress she was, and what a personality she was, how she dominated a stage and stuff. That all is missing. You see, so as far as I'll tell you what you need. Actually, it's got to come from the group, from the roots up. It's got to come from people in houses, people whose kids play music, people who have music in schools, people who are it's like where there's a robust musical reality around, and I am afraid that is gone with the wind. That we don't have that anymore. I mean, that we've already got 3 generations of kids who never heard Beethoven being played on a Caliphone school phonograph. I mean, I got music appreciation when I was in grammar school, so at least I had a little bit of exposure to music in general, and so did the kid that used to beat me up. I mean, even he got musical appreciation. A little bit might have sunk in and stuff like that. But honestly, I think that really it's like the reason, the way we're gonna bring this country back together, like quit it being so divisive, is to reintroduce music in public schools. That's it.
That can heal us.
That's right. You put an instrument in a kid's hands, he'll never pick up a gun. So that's my last word.
Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you so much, Mark. I'll end with, of all people, from Ted's book. Charles Darwin said he saw sex as the source of all musical making, claiming that the songs of human societies grew out of the mating calls of birds and other creatures. This is in 1871. He said, love is still the commonest theme of all our songs. So the thing about love is that we can continue this love fest for jazz and jazz film and live music with podcasts like this. So it's the great Rob Grant allowing us to be on his podcast, Live TV, evoking the 50s live TV. And it's like a miracle. So, this is like McLuhan said, communication of the new is a miracle, but not impossible. So I want to thank both of you, Mark Cantor and Brad Kay, for keeping jazz alive and the love of jazz alive.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Yay.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Gary.
Brad.
We'll talk.
We'll
Brad,
talk.
hey,
Yeah,
Brad,
man. Yeah, it's been too long.
Over
is
and out.
Susie over there?
She's
Yeah.
here.
Give her my love. Hi, Susie.
Come over for dinner.
Hey,
Dinner.
Jerry,
Yeah.
once this Omicron is done, we've got a date for a film show.
Oh, we got
Oh,
one.
please.
We got
Oh,
one.
good.
I'm going to tell you the details. You'll love it. Okay, people, I love you. Over and
Talk
out.
to